Well, thanks for having me here. This is definitely a group who I have worked with for many years in my career. And given the department has about, give or take, a $10 billion a year E&C budget, I think we're a major customer of probably a number of people here. So thanks for having me here, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the department and most importantly, how we engineer a new future for energy in this country and where we are today and where we're going, which is very exciting. I wanted to give a couple of comments about what the department is. Department of Energy, a lot of people have no idea what the Department of Energy does, and I'll give a few comments. So the department has about a $34 billion a year budget. And the first thing that many people don't realize, the major buckets that we do, is that we handle the nuclear weapons program for the country. It's actually a very major engineering and construction set of operations. It came from the history of the department, and just a very quick version of where the Department of Energy came from is that when the Manhattan Project started and a number of different facilities were built during World War II, the most famous ones being Oak Ridge, Los Alamos, Hanford, and many others, that there were obviously some very famous scientists and generals who put that together. Oppenheimer, Grove, Enrico Fermi, who came from Italy, escaping fascism, put together these respective laboratories that finished the Manhattan Project. On the back of that, the federal government managed that in heading into the Cold War, where the ramp up associated with the production of plutonium and weapons was vast. And there was tremendous amounts of construction all around the United States and the operation of that. And it was set up under the Atomic Energy Commission that was the predecessor of the department. A number of laboratories that were set up not only for weapons but for science over the course of time also grew up. So there were places such as Lawrence Berkeley, Lawrence Livermore. We have a laboratory at Stanford called SLAC. Savannah River, which was also a weapons. We have a laboratory in Princeton. We have 17 national labs that came up around the country. And when President Carter decided to move that from the Atomic Energy Commission into a more broader energy area, that's when the department came into being. But the original part of the department was in the weapons program, and a very big part of still what we do and an important part of what we as an administration are focused on is that a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the construction, a lot of things that people here in this room do, had been underinvested for quite a period of time. It came from a time period of the ending of the Cold War, and a lot of infrastructure had not been maintained, and it's an area that we're focused on and maintaining our proper defensive posture and deliver what we need to in terms of materials to the Department of Defense. The second area that the department does is run the Office of Science, which is one of my areas that I deal with day to day. We are at the cutting edge of much of what happens in the world in terms of a number of areas dealing with the physical sciences. We have the most cutting edge technology in chemistry, in particular in batteries, where we have multiple different types of batteries that we're working on that are well beyond lithium-ion levels of performance. We have the highest end computing in the world on supercomputers, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We're at the lead in the world still on particle physics, nuclear physics, high energy particle physics, and we actually co-led with the National Institutes of Health on the Human Genome Project and on gene editing. On top of that, we actually do real energy work. So we deal with fossil, we deal with carbon capture, nuclear, different forms of green power around wind and solar and geothermal, and on utility work. And on top of that, we actually own some utilities. So we own Bonneville and WAPA and a number of others. And we also own the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So we're actually a crude oil supplier, not as big as Kinder Morgan or some of the others that you probably work on. But we're a reasonably large enterprise in terms of crude oil supply. So it's a pretty broad scope of what we do at the department. It is, in some respects, there's a lot of history. The history comes from the labs. Most of the work that we do are lab-centric. But when you stop and think about weapons and particle physics and human genomics and carbon capture, it does seem there's a number of different areas, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And we have a lot of different constituencies to work with and deal with, given that breadth. Given in my particular area that I deal with an awful lot, but also work on the weapons side, a lot of what we do deals with contractors. Actually, the significant majority of the cash that goes out the door, the Department of Energy, goes to contractors. Most people don't realize that either. We actually contract for lab operations. We contract for construction. If you actually want to look at real construction, about $10 billion a year is actually in real, what I would call hardcore E&C, so we're a major customer. But on top of that, technically, we have contractors that run each of our labs. So there's M&O contractors that deal actually with operations in addition to construction. And so when I think about our management on a day-to-day basis of our everyday work, a lot of it comes down to three things that are very that relate across whether it's weapons or science or cleanup or in the applied areas. We deal with contracting and sending out RFPs and evaluating bids that come in from firms like yours. We deal with contractor management because we have things that are ongoing. Obviously, you all deal with your customers that deal with contractor management. And not all of them, some are M&O contracts, but many of them are project management. So they're very specific projects that we're building. And the vast majority of what we build is first of a kind. It may be a first of a kind X-ray free laser at Stanford. It might be dealing with a chemical process, a radiochemical chemical process dealing with spent nuclear fuel. It may deal with weapons. So there's a number of things that we deal with, and given they're first of a kind and large, this is a lot of what we do. So I just wanted to give you a quick snapshot of what the department is, just to kind of spread the word a bit more about what we do. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I want to talk a little bit about the energy sector right now. And Secretary Perry, if you've watched it a little bit here recently, has been talking about the new energy realism. And the important part of where we are today is around innovation in the energy sector and allowing the private sector to grow in an all the above way. If you think about where we are today versus where we were, for example, in the late 70s, we have low cost, we have a tremendous amount of energy from multiple different sources. And to repeat it, we're about all the above. We like solar, we like wind, we support nuclear and fossil across the board, hydro, fuel cells. We feel very strongly about letting the private sector rise up, for us to be reducing regulation, for us to support innovation, because that's really where, when you think about what can government do well, we are not in the private sector. You know where the markets are better than we do. What we do a good job of is on basic research, on items that we know the private sector has a harder time looking at a P&L statement and investing in. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those examples. But in the energy sector right now, if you look at it on a BOE equivalent basis, we are the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. We are the largest oil. It's not Russia. It's not Saudi Arabia. It's us. How did we get there? Because we were not there just literally a few years ago. We got to where we are today because of innovation, because of engineering on production of oil and gas, and allowing Americans to have the proper motivation and to allow, for example, allow exports to happen. We didn't allow exports to happen, as you know, from the late 70s on. And allowing the innovation of the private sector and us to support that to flourish. I spend far too much time on a bike trainer, and I look at videos on YouTube, and I do a lot of racing actually with on Ironman. Too long of a discussion, but one of the things that I've been watching here recently is looking back at the sweater speeches from Jimmy Carter. And I went to the Naval Academy, so I don't want to kind of lay on him too much. And he was a nuclear submariner like I was. But take that aside. If everyone remembers the 70s, you had to line up in your car, and you could only buy gas every other day based on the last digit being odd or even on your license plate. You remember those days? I grew up in Oklahoma. We had to line up for gas in Oklahoma. It's a little funny when you think about that, right? If you go back and look at his fireside speeches, President Carter got up and he looked at what where the world was, and he decided the solution was that we had to do more with less. And you can just watch the videos of him sitting in there, right, in the White House with the sweater on, and saying, we need to find a Texas every year of oil and gas in order just to keep up, and we're not going to. So let's figure out how we do more for less. He passed restrictions on the use of natural gas, if you may remember. So that was the solution, what they saw. There was a lack of supply, and instead of focusing on innovation, instead of focusing on allowing the private sector to move forward, they decided to put restrictions on the private sector because there was no place but down in terms of where we were from an energy abundance point of view. This is amazing where we are today. It really, truly is amazing today. And it's not only about where we are with energy and the price and you all being able to get out and build things and allowing us allowing you to go out and do that, which has happened. This is why it's happened, because of your contribution and the rest of the infrastructure industry. This is why we're here today. But not only that, but we've actually led the world in the reduction of emissions. Most people don't realize that. So when the secretary goes off to other countries and gets lectured about us and treaties and so on, he loves to make quotes about actual data. And being an engineer, and there's a room full of engineers, he'd like to have actually real data. So if you look at 2005 to 2017, we led the world in the reduction in carbon. That's a fact. And why are we there? We are there because of innovation. If you look at what we've been able to do on efficiency in terms of gas turbines, in terms of where we've installed solar, where we've installed wind, where we are, turbines broadly speaking, if you look at efficiency that we've done in terms of operations, where the private sector, and you all, once again, very big part of this, where you and your customers have invested to look at efficiency of buildings and so on. Obviously, transportation. That is actually, we have led the world in terms of reduction of carbon. So, and what has been driving that, once again, that's innovation. Another big part of that is around regulation. One of the big things that we've done is when we've come in here, we've taken a look at what the statutory requirements are around regulation, and we're looking at what other regulation was put on that was not part of statutory requirements, and we're looking at doing what's statutorily required. We're trying to focus on what was important from the Hill in terms of when statute was actually passed, and we're focusing on what the exact requirements are. And that has led to our ability to review and to process things, which once again, I think there's a general history of scope. This is almost like an engineering construction kind of joke here. It's amazing how scope expands, right? I deal a lot with that with contractors. And regulation is no different. And so this is an important part of what we're doing. I want to talk about a few different particular areas. One of them is in nuclear energy. Obviously, right now, there's been a profound change in the energy markets. And right now, we're highly focused on making certain that all the different areas get the appropriate amount of innovation. What's happened here over the last 8 or 10 years, you've seen a lot of innovation, money being spent around improvements in cost and production and manufacturing and installation of wind turbines, in which wind turbine efficiencies, capacity factors have nearly doubled. Solar panel manufacturing and installation costs, and a lot of it is installation costs, I assume lots of people here in this room do that, has also dropped. If you look at oil and gas production cost, it's dropped. If you look at turbine efficiency factors on heat rates, they've dropped. And a reasonable amount of that has been in part some of the support that the Department of Energy has made at our national labs and some of the innovation, whether it's material science and wind turbines and many others. But on the nuclear side, we need to make certain that we invest in innovation on the nuclear side because it has not moved as fast as some of the other areas of energy production. So rethinking, re-engineering, reimagining what we can do on the nuclear side is a very important part. We're looking, and we have some people here who have been doing some work on the advanced reactor side, looking at fast reactors, looking at SMR reactors. Obviously, it's a particular area of interest of mine from my history on the engineering side. And obviously working with private sector associated with that. So that's one particular area that we're particularly interested in. Secondly is on the fossil side. Once again, fossil energy production, whether it's oil, natural gas, the private sector, with our support, has significantly reduced production costs and has greatly benefited this country. One of the things I wanted to point out in terms of around this particular topic is just how different the world is in terms of our geopolitical situation. Right now, we're exporting natural gas to Abu Dhabi. Okay, stop and think about that for a quick second, okay? Abu Dhabi's in the Middle East, just to remind everyone. Middle East supposed to export energy to us. Abu Dhabi and Dubai actually import natural gas from the United States. It gets into a longer geopolitical thing about dealing with the Qataris, which probably most people at least generally understand. And they regas on FSRUs, floating storage regas units, which are basic LNG tankers that are just moored, that they can do regas in and feed right into the system rather than building a large regas facility, which probably this crowd you'd rather build a regas facility, so I apologize. But that particular technology, which was, once again, to allow regas on tankers that you could moor someplace, was developed in the United States. The company is owned by a company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's the biggest FSRU company in the world, most competitive. Technology and innovation in the United States, developed here in the United States, and it's regassing gas in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Once again, the gas coming from the United States. This is a strange world. This is a strangely positive world for the United States. Because if you think about the value chain, someone here in the United States is drilling for that natural gas. And someone, people in this room, are building transportation to take that natural gas from Oklahoma or from Texas or from Louisiana or from Ohio and taking it to an LNG facility. And then that LNG facility has to be built. And there's, as people here in this room know, there's a tremendous amount of construction at these LNG facilities, which we were highly encouraged by. And then it gets shipped off and delivered. The value chain for that, for American jobs, for American infrastructure on that major change has been profound. And we're very positive about that. We're also very focused on clean coal. There is a lot more to do on carbon capture. In particular, for the Department of Energy, a lot of this deals with chemistry. And we have a major chemistry area associated at our national labs, much too long to get into. But it's a very important part of what we do and what we understand on the chemistry side. I'll give one other kind of quick point around chemistry about something that we do that deals with transportation, obviously an important part of this, this group here, is dealing with battery technology. One of the things that we do in the National Lab Complex is working on next generation batteries. We have multiple types of batteries in terms of different chemistries: lithium, sulfur, magnesium, ion, solid state, flow batteries for utilities, that are all in the range of 3 times more higher performance than current lithium ion, 3 times. And what we could do with 3 times higher, and we have, just at Argonne alone, just one of our labs, we have over 80 companies that we're dealing with, working on commercialization on the battery side. And so we have a tremendous amount of involvement with the private sector. I'm just picking on batteries. And what we do with that, if we're able to get to batteries with 3 times the performance, will have a significant impact on where the energy sector will change, and ergo for people here, a significant amount of infrastructure required on the electric side and the charging side that I'm certain everyone here follows or frankly does a lot of work on, that will need a significant amount of build out on the infrastructure side should that work. There was a recent bid at Excel Energy in Colorado. I don't know if anyone here does work with Excel. There we go. Who just took a bunch of bids. And what's been actually very fascinating is that combined wind or solar plus battery combo bids were basically at the same price as natural gas. That's actually quite interesting if you stop and think about that. And what's also interesting is that they looked at combustion turbine construction and compared that to batteries. And batteries were about 2.5 times more expensive on a $1 per kilowatt month basis. So if we're able to deliver on batteries that are 3 times more performance, if you linearly, because it is, you can linearly extrapolate that batteries, the next generation of batteries might be as efficient as gas combustion turbines. I'll give one transportation example, and this is slightly crazy, but it's actually true in terms of the transportation side and batteries, which I think is fascinating, which is has anyone in this room heard of eVTOL? Anyone? No one. Okay. For those of you who are in the military, VTOL is vertical takeoff and landing. E is electric. There are real companies meaning Airbus and Uber, looking at building drones to carry people. This is take your typical drone that you see out there with 4 propellers and taking off and maybe carrying a package for Amazon. They're actually spending money. You can find this. Uber's actually doing a big conference on this, to actually put a family of 4 on a big enough, like a car version of this, and actually carry people around. So what's the technology required potentially for that? By the way, there's actually a building being built in Miami, a new contractor who's actually building a pad at the top of his tower for eVTOL parking, because he said, it's going to come. I'm actually going to be the first building that's going to allow it to happen. So, God bless him, right? But what's going to take, for that to work? It's going to take autonomous flying software, so that's a whole separate topic. And it's going to take power densities on batteries much higher than what we have with lithium ion. So when I sit down with my people and the researchers at Argonne and PNNL and go where are we going, right? What's the aspects of this? This is, whether it plays out or not, there's real people, real money really looking at this, have a real impact on the transportation sector. Very exciting sort of stuff that we're dealing with. On the infrastructure side, rebuilding and renewal of the country is very important to us as an administration. It's very important to us as an energy, but overall as an administration. Building a stronger America, which is the president's layout on the infrastructure side, is a very important part. Obviously pushing very hard on trying to get the funding for that, trying to get that through Congress. Once again, removing is not only funding, and once again, the way we're looking at it is how do we partner with local, state and local. As you know, there's a lot of debate about whether all the money comes from Washington or, I think the way we're looking at this is we want to be seed money, come from the business sector, so have a reasonably good view of, it's better to give seed money and try to make certain that I'll just keep talking. Oh, there we go. Maybe I need to talk louder. I thought it was pretty loud. In order for us to seed money, rather than us provide 100% of the money, and obviously tremendous amounts of this should go into transportation. But it's also to remove regulatory barriers in terms of the timing and the number of steps on the regulatory side required in order to get things moving. I'm very familiar with that as a principal in the construction side. And it's something that obviously is, as the country's gotten bigger with more government everywhere, that has been a slowdown, as this group knows very well. And we're very focused on trying to do that in order to try to get energy infrastructure, overall infrastructure moving forward, and to create a better network for the energy lifeblood for our economy. One of the things that I touched on a little bit earlier is around LNG. LNG exports is a big particular issue for the Department of Energy. As I mentioned earlier, the number of construction jobs that are directly associated with LNG construction is significant at any one of these sites. And the opportunity for us to continue as a country on expanding those is very high. We're very happy we have 2 up and running right now. And as you know, we have several other in filings. Department of Energy is actually the agency that reviews those. And we have been much more focused on meeting the statutory obligations and sticking to the statutory obligations on LNG siting and reviews that we do. And we certainly look forward to additional siting being completed and additional facilities being built, strengthening the country in terms of the infrastructure around energy and our overall economy as a result. The construction jobs and the careers that people get from people like you is very important to the country. Long-term employment not only just for the people who work at the facility, but as I said, everyone across the value chain. And that includes pipe rollers and drillers and chemical engineers and petroleum engineers, up and down, electricians obviously, up and down through the value chain. This is a very important part of the country, and it's a very important part of how we think about it at the department. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the innovation. You'll hear this over and over again from us as administration, which is about innovation. At the end of the day, innovation is what's driving us forward. One of the things that I like to point out is as we think about the various different technologies that we, the department, deal with, whether it's, as I said, whether it's chemistry, materials, high-performance computing, genomics, there's a number of things that we deal with. But many times we as a country, given where we are, have a hard time competing on price. Not always, but many times we have a hard time competing with other countries based on price. But we can compete with other nations based on innovation. And what I'm increasingly hearing from manufacturers around the country, and not just U.S. manufacturers, or foreign manufacturers from Europe and elsewhere, are talking about where they want to site something, where they want to build something, is that they increasingly see that it's important to be close to the center of innovation. Because as new products come online associated with whatever they're manufacturing, that rather than having a manufacturing far overseas on the other side of the Pacific, it's better to be near where the innovation hubs are, where the engineers are who can look at a new process, look at new products, and be able to quickly turn those around and turn them into to get into the production line is becoming increasingly important. So we're highly focused. This is obviously a core skill set of the department with our national lab complex. I talked a little bit about batteries. I mentioned that we have the highest end computers in the world. We just announced a $1.8 billion RFP for contractors to build our second and third exascale computers this last week. That is 10 to the 18th calculations per second. That's a lot. I'll just leave it at that. And you know what's actually interesting is that those contractors, I apologize, once again, wrong crowd. Those contractors are not this crowd. Those contractors who actually I'm contracting with are Intel and IBM and Cray and AMD and NVIDIA. So I'm very excited about dealing with that section of the economy in terms of driving innovation, driving computing infrastructure associated with that. One of the things that we do also from an innovation point of view, I'll give you a couple of examples. One's on machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I know you all have heard quite a bit about this. We work a lot with, we have the highest end computers in the world, and we continue to build, yet jumping over and over the different computing capabilities, although I have to admit it is very competitive with the Chinese right now. Much longer conversation. But we are there, and we continue to drive things forward. But on artificial intelligence and machine learning, the applicability to IoT, to the Internet of Things, real operations around AI and machine learning is vast. No disrespect to the Googles and the Amazons of the world, that's retail and search. That's wonderful, and that's very efficient that they do on data management and around retail. But the vast majority of the world is not retail. How this energy is managed in this building, how the electric grid dispatches, how a offshore oil drilling well is managed in terms of the engineering and operations. You can build an algorithm to manage each and every one of those. And the amount of efficiency that we could have, that you all can drive in terms of construction and where things are going, in terms of integrated systems, whether it's energy management and operations of a building, you're going to build a new chemical plant, whatever it is. The ability for us to integrate machine learning into operations, which once again, it's not about people losing their jobs. Actually, this is about having computer systems with tremendous amounts of data who can optimize the operation of the electricity usage in this building. No one's losing their job over that. But I tell you what, the company who owns this hotel is going to save money at the end of the day. And it's going to be more efficient. There's going to be better operations. That's where the exciting part of machine learning and artificial intelligence is. And our computing side has a lot to deal with that. So I'll stop giving examples, but I have far too many of them. But I'd like to thank everyone here. I'm glad to take a few questions. You all are what drive the future of this country. It's about building. That's what we're focused on. We very much appreciate everything that everyone's doing here. Hopefully we're helping. Hopefully we're moving things along. Hopefully we're getting out of the way where things were in your way previously, and that we can help fund and help drive that. And thank you for everything that you do.